Okay. All right. I've been contemplating for a while whether or not to do the movement portion first or the lecture portion first. And so when I teach live, it's really easy. I always teach the movement portion first because of eating times. And because we are all in different time zones, and some of us are better learners top down, meaning it makes more sense to cognitively wrap our brain around the information in a lecture and then embody it and feel it and move. And others are the opposite, right? You prefer to feel it in your body, and so bottom up, and then think about it with your brain, and not that they are separate. What I'm thinking of doing this weekend, because we're all in different time zones and it's not an easy answer, is maybe flip-flopping throughout the weekend. Sometimes teaching the lecture first, sometimes teaching the movement first. But feel free to, chime in the chat box if you have a strong preference, because there are arguments that can be made for both. But I think for today, what I'm going to do is dive into the lecture first and then the movement second. There is movement within the lecture, but especially since it's the first day, this will kind of help set the groundwork of just some basic definitions and terminology, and then we will move and breathe together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint for today. And all of you have this. Let's see, share. And let's see, I'm going to see how I can go to present mode. Oh, wait, that's not the one I want to share. I want to go to a different one. Let's see, how do I get this out of the way? There we go. Okay, and then present. Okay, and then I'm going to move this, I think, over here. All right, great. Okay, so this first session is called History, Concepts, and Terminology of Somatics. And you can, follow along with me. Let's see, I'm going to try to click right so it goes to the next slide. There we go. Okay, let me make sure I didn't go too far, too fast. No. Okay, there we go. Okay, let me double check. Yes. Okay, got it. All right, so objectives for this lecture and for today. The first objective is to understand the definition and benefits of somatic movement. We're going to learn about the history of somatics. We're going to explore somatics terminology. So as I bring up these words throughout the rest of the weekend, you'll understand what they mean, and also how they apply to yoga. The next objective is discovering how to apply these somatic concepts to your yoga practice and to your teaching. Okay, so that brings us to what is somatic movement. And if you look up the word somatics, the first thing you'll see is that somatics is a field of study that is derived from the Greek word soma. And soma typically is translated as body. Within the context of movement, though, somatics can be defined as how the mind and body are perceived from within to self-correct and heal. And I'm going to grab my favorite book, and this is included on one of the next slides with a link, so it's easy to find. But this book right here is my favorite. It's written by Martha Eddy, and it's called Mindful Movement: The Evolution of the Somatic Arts and Conscious Action. And the reason why I love this book so much is, first of all, Martha Eddy is a legend. She's incredible. I highly recommend checking out all that she offers. It's a very beginning. So you can see here's chapter 1, and then there's this page right here. What she did, I think, is so brilliant is it's a big chart. It almost looks like an astrology chart, which makes me think of you, Serena. But it has all the different sort of somatic pioneers, not just in movement, but in body work. So like, Ida Dr. Rolf is here, Milton Traeger is here. And then it has these circles that go out and out and out. And they show like who studied with whom. So, if you've heard of like, say, Mabel Todd, and then you go, oh, Mabel Todd, and there's a line going to Lulu Swigard, which goes to Irene Dowd, who I was lucky enough to take a bunch of workshops with, who's incredible, which then goes to Eric Franklin. And I guess in terms of yoga, you could perhaps think of it like lineage. So it's just a way to kind of wrap your brain around what came from where and how big and broad the somatic movement and bodywork field is. There's like Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen is out here, and Rudolf Laban is here in the middle, next, with a line to Irmgard Bartenieff. Anyways, I just love this. And I think it kind of gives you a nice big picture. But the book is excellent. So I just wanted to put that out there right at the beginning.
Trina, can you tell us the name of the book again?
Yes, there should be, there's definitely a link to it in the PowerPoint coming up, but it's called Mindful Movement. And then the subheading is The Evolution of the Somatic Arts and Conscious Action. And it's by Martha Eddy, Eddy. Yeah. And Martha Eddy is an exercise physiologist, somatic therapist, dance educator, and advocate for all kinds of things like social justice. So yes, highly recommend. Like, if you only buy one book, that's a good one. Okay, so what is somatic movement? In this weekend, as I said, there's so many somatic pioneers and leaders and teachers and methods. I'm going to focus on 3, and those are the 3 that I've studied with the most. I am not certified in any specific. I didn't do the Feldenkrais, certification, or the hemisomatic certification, or do the Laban Bartenieff certification. I just have had the really good fortune to have been able to take regular weekly classes in those modalities, which is actually how I like to learn. I like taking trainings, but I love taking either regular weekly private lessons or classes and learning slowly over time. So the first person, so those 3, did I mention them? Yes. Moshe Feldenkrais, Thomas Hanna, and Bartenieff, which, sorry, anyways, I'm getting off track. All right, let's get back on track. So what is somatic movement? Thomas Hanna used the term somatics as a way to define his approach to mind and body integration in order to define this field within movement education. So understanding that there is also somatics as related to, say, body work and not to movement. From a research perspective, somatics relates closely to and crosses over into the field of interoception. And interoception is your body, your awareness of what's happening on the inside. For example, your awareness of hunger or thirst, your awareness of your heartbeat, your breath. It's different from proprioception. But what's cool about all of this is these pioneers who started out way before there was any research on all of this, and now there is, and they were just ahead of their time. Okay, so history of the Feldenkrais method. Moshe Feldenkrais was born in the Ukraine in 1904 to a Jewish family. And it's interesting, we'll get to Irmgard Bartenieff as well, but she was born, I think, in 1905. So, just perspective on, 120 years ago, 2 of these 3 were born. And so Moshe participated in a Jewish self-defense education, and I've never taken any Krav Maga, but I'm assuming it was similar to something like that. And jujitsu, that's hard to say, and began to create his own method of self-defense after studying jujitsu and what he had learned in the self-defense education. I'm just giving you like the highlights. There's so much more information on Moshe, and he's written so many books that are wonderful. But what happened, as with most of us who are in this field, is we get injured in some way, and that doesn't have to be physical. It could be emotional or a combination of the two. But he had a knee injury in 1929, and that ended his soccer career. And so in 1933, he met the founder of judo. And I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce the founder of judo's name correctly, so feel free to correct me. Jigoro Kano, and I'm guessing here, I need to really make sure I'm saying that correctly. But he impressed Kano with his book on self-defense. And so Kano wanted to help Feldenkrais to share his work in Europe. And that is usually how all these things begin, right? Is somebody studies something, they make some changes to it or build on it, write a book, and then somebody else goes, oh my gosh, wow, this more people need to know about this. And that's exactly what happened. So Moshe understood the mind-body connection way before people understood it or talked about it or believed in it. And he understood the impact of the emotional stress caused by injuring his knee. And that's pretty remarkable, I think, because, today still it's not common to, we're going to get into pain science, but it's not common to think about the emotional stress of a physical injury, which it seems obvious, but it's not. But so because of this, he decided to try to heal himself rather than have surgery, which is another not common thing to do back then. So what he realized is that he was able to change how he moved and to overcome his injury without a meniscus. And this is, I'll look it up so that I have it for all of you tomorrow. But there's been a lot of research on excessive surgeries for meniscus tears and things like that. And, is it really necessary and all of that? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I do think it's pertinent here. So he created group classes and private lessons. And the group classes, which I took for, probably about 4 years, once a week with a few different teachers here in Los Angeles, are called ATM classes. And ATM stands for Awareness Through Movement. And I highly recommend that you experience an ATM class. And what is so wonderful about this day and age that we live in is you can do that online. Later on in the PowerPoint, I recommend my favorite people on YouTube for Henna Somatics, Feldenkrais, and Bartenieff. And so we'll get to that. But there are also endless free resources in addition to YouTube for ATM classes, so audio libraries from Feldenkrais certified practitioners. And then functional integration. And I've had 2 functional integration private sessions, which were really incredible. And so I encourage you to take advantage of that when we can do things like that again, or if you can, where you are. And I think that's really important because as far as my work, I have always taught lots and lots of private sessions every year that I've been a teacher, and still continue to, because I do think the type of learning that happens in private one-on-one sessions is very different than what happens in a group class. And so that's something I really appreciate about his work, is that he puts emphasis on both. So he developed those 2 options, the group classes and the private sessions, after decades of self-experimentation and studying the work. And then again, here we go with Fudajeff, I think is how it's pronounced, Alexander, Bates, and Jacoby. So, we are all influenced by so many other people in the work that we do. So it's, you can start to Google some of those, but Alexander would be like Alexander technique. And so the group classes emphasized exploration instead of aesthetic or goal-oriented movement. And I bolded that because I think it's really important. My previous career worked in fashion design and jewelry design and textile design. I am a visual learner. I mean, I learn in all the ways, but I'm very, visual learning is one of my favorite ways to learn. And I think what made me fall in love with Feldenkrais was all the visual learning that I had done as a yogi, a mover in so many different modalities throughout my life. And then sort of taking away the visual and getting a whole different perspective on mindful movement in these Feldenkrais classes. So in the Feldenkrais class, there's no demonstration. The teacher just teaches verbally, occasionally. But if they do, they'll say, like, don't tell the Feldenkrais police that I demoed. And there's no right or wrong. So it's very based on you figuring out the puzzle and maybe figuring out that there's no one way to solve the puzzle. Okay, so movement, not for the sake of repetition or mimicking a teacher, but to train your brain. So here we go with like how ahead of his time he was to train your brain and your nervous system. So most of us, myself included, when you're drawn to learning about the body, it's mostly, we think of anatomy, muscles, bones, the musculoskeletal system, and we aren't necessarily thinking a whole lot about neuroscience and the brain and the nervous system. So there's so many famous quotes by Moshe Feldenkrais. One of them, and I might say it incorrectly, I should have written it down, but it's basically along the lines of, we're training your brain, not your body, when we do ATM classes, which of course, it's not an either or, but he really emphasizes that. And that's to help the student find their own path to moving with ease. Okay, so moving on to Thomas Hanna. Thomas Hanna was a student of Moshe Feldenkrais. And my introduction to Hanna somatics was actually through yoga. There's a studio, I'm not sure if, I think they closed recently. Actually, Kim is going to be on this here. And yeah, I heard that studio closed. It's in Simi Valley, And I took a workshop with the owner of the studio, and it was Hanna somatics and yoga workshop. So Thomas Hanna studied philosophy as well as neurology. And all of these somatic pioneers in the movement field were integrators and interdisciplinary learners. And that's another thing that I just really love about somatics, and especially these three somatic pioneers, is their ability to take the best from different modalities and put it together to help people. So his study of philosophy and neurology helped him understand that physical issues couldn't be fully resolved without considering a person's psychology and vice versa. And this, of course, makes me want to go down a rabbit hole about somatic psychotherapy, which is another, which is a newer field. And I have been in therapy for many years, but for about 8 years, I was in therapy with a somatic psychotherapist and learned so much from that experience. And so it's interesting to see the parallels of, say, psychologists who integrate the body, and then say somebody like Thomas Hanna, who maybe was more of an academic, more in, say, Western medicine, neurology, Western philosophy, and then bringing in the body. Okay. So Thomas Hanna witnessed Feldenkrais demonstrating techniques on a man who had cerebral palsy. cerebral palsy, that resolved some of the issues for the gentleman in a way that a medical doctor would have deemed permanent. So you can imagine, light bulbs were going off. And, side note, my husband is a musculoskeletal radiologist. So, I'm very close to sort of the Western medicine side of things. And then of course, so involved in movement and learning new ways outside of that Western model that might be helpful. And so again, he was bridging between disciplines. So Thomas Hanna invited Feldenkrais to the school as a visiting professor. And then that allowed Feldenkrais to lead a professional education program in the United States from 1975 to 1978. So, it's interesting, I think, that Feldenkrais keeps meeting these people who discover what he's doing, and then, say, okay, you need to teach at this school, whether it's a martial arts school or it's a university, and share what you're doing. So Thomas Hanna used somatic education to refer to the process of using movement to work with the mind and the body to improve health and function. And I think that's really important here. So he used somatic education to refer to the process of using movement. The process of using movement, which I just that makes me so excited, because I think of myself, as a yoga teacher and a Pilates teacher, but also a movement educator, and how empowering it can be to witness people learn how to move in new ways and how to move in more efficient ways. So, it's like this whole new branch of education is born. I mean, can you imagine? I'm just thinking, what if there had been a class in elementary school called somatic education, or preschool or junior high or high school? It would be incredible. So Thomas Hanna also integrated his understanding of the nervous system into his work as a way to use movement to retrain the body and brain connection. Now, again, I'm going to say that again. He integrated his understanding of the nervous system. So I know when I took my 200-hour yoga teacher training, the first thing we learned about the nervous system was parasympathetic versus sympathetic, and rest and digest versus fight or flight. Of course, now we know so much more with polyvagal theory, but that's kind of the starting point that we all get in our yoga 200-hour training. And so he was putting these things together as well. So asana related to the nervous system and the breath and mindfulness, and then here just movement, any kind of movement and somatic movement, as a way to retrain the body and brain connection. He developed something called voluntary pandiculation, and we're going to experience pandiculation, but this is a movement technique that reduces tension through movement instead of passive modalities. And I'm taking a deep breath, because that's it's one of the many, many, many reasons why I absolutely love somatics. I feel like I have all of these tools in my toolbox, and some of them are more passive and some of them are more active. And what I love about somatics is that it's more active, meaning the student does it themselves as opposed to something being done to them. But it's also relaxing, because a lot of times we think of this polarity of, you're either getting a massage, or you're doing a workout, and one is passive and one is active. So this idea of something being active and voluntary, you're doing it yourself, you are moving, but it's still relaxing, I find to be pretty profound. What he realized is that voluntary movement, so, not say, if you go to the physical therapist and they, or body worker, which I love, massage therapist, and they move your limbs around or your head, and they do things to you that feel good and maybe introduce movement, but you're doing the movement yourself, that this was an effective way to retrain the nervous system and to improve movement patterns, as well as reduce muscle tension and joint discomfort. All right. I am going to do this and just make sure. I'm going to check in. Okay, I see. So if I want to go back to chat box, I have to kind of do other things. So I'm going to keep going. But as you all have questions, and then, you know, Serena or Andy, you know, just stop me if I'm missing like a ton of questions, because I'm a little afraid of going back and forth. Okay. Yeah, just shout out to me. Okay, let me go back. See, I knew that would happen. Let's see, how do I? There we go. Okay.
Trina, there is an interesting question that, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Trina, can you hear me? Yeah, there is an interesting question specifically related to Hannah. Chrissy Bowen asks, was Hannah aware of yoga as a modality, or was this all happening in parallel?
That's an excellent question. And off the top of my head, I don't know. So it makes me actually want to pick this up right now and start searching through it. But it also reminds me that I wanted to show you the second book that I recommend everyone get if they only get one book is this book. And this is Somatics by Thomas Hanna. And yeah, you're making me want to I'm going to look that up later because I don't know the answer for sure off the top of my head. My gut instinct would be to think yes, but I don't know. You know, just given the milieu that he was in at the time. And I know he was like at Esalen and, you know, yoga, like everything in the 60s and 70s, yoga was pretty prominent amongst these pioneers. But I'm not going to answer definitively until I look it up. But my mom actually gave me this book. Gosh, I'm 48. I think she gave it to me like when I was 30, about 18 years ago. I was having pain everywhere in my body from being a desk jockey and just, you know, working in corporate America at a computer all day and clicking mouse and all of the things. So if you go look it up now, this book has a newer cover, but it's the same book. It's just a newer edition. And yeah, this book is incredible. The old school thing I love about it is the sequences in the back have little wooden doll figures. So we will be doing one of these sequences, or you've already done it in the pre-recorded. But anyways, Serena, will I be able to tonight, like the questions will still be there, or do I need to write it down now to make sure I don't forget?
I will. It's in there. I marked it that you answered live, but
yeah, keep it.
There, and I will also write it down and remind you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because after, you know, today I'll look it up. Okay, next slide. Oh, we already did that. Okay, so he realized that voluntary movement was an effective way to retrain the nervous system, to improve movement patterns, and reduce muscle tension and joint discomfort. So when I say empowering, like that is the first thing that comes to my mind is improving movement patterns. And I know there's all different kinds of reasons for pain, and we're going to get into pain science in a future lecture. But one of the best ways to decrease pain is to increase proprioception. And somatic movements teach proprioception and help people improve their movement patterns. So another reason why I think they are so wonderful. Okay, so Thomas Hanna connected. Yes, I was like, is that conducted? Connected research on cortical learning to movement, which taught him that the change associated with aging has more to do with the nervous system's adaptation to repetitive movement and positions. Well, let's say that again, because that's another big one. So he connected research on cortical learning, so on the brain, research on the brain to movement, which taught him that change associated with aging. So this idea that, like, you know, as your brain is set, There's no neuroplasticity. Once you get older, you can't learn new things. That was what people thought. And he said, no. He said, this change has to do more with just adapting to repetitive movements and positions than it does with aging. And so what that means is, right, if you start doing more varied movements and you're in more varied positions throughout your day, then the aging process is not the same. So he used these findings to help students improve motor control and to recover from several issues. He tragically died in a car accident in 1990, and it was very soon after, it was after teaching the first trimester of his first professional training program in clinical somatic education. I have in the upcoming slide the links for if you want to do this training program. It is based in Novato, California, and his wife, Eleanor Criswell, still runs it and teaches the program. So his students went on to create training programs based on his methodology. And then this book that I just showed you, Somatics, Reawakening the Mind's Control of Movement, Flexibility, and Health, was the most well-known of all of Thomas Hanna's books. He left behind the tools for people to take care of themselves and to be self-reliant in addressing pain and discomfort. So thank goodness he wrote that book before he passed away. Okay, our third somatic pioneer that we are going to focus on this weekend. Her name is Irmgard Bartenieff, and she was born in Berlin, Germany in 1900. She was a dancer, a physical therapist, and a cross-cultural scholar. So again, here we go. Moshe Feldenkrais was, I don't know if I put it in here, but he was an engineer. I forgot about that. A martial artist, like a black belt in judo. And then here we are, right now. It's pretty common that you find physical therapists that were former dancers or dancers. But then on top of it, to also be a scholar in academics, pretty unusual. So she was an early adopter in the fields of dance and movement therapy. And, movement therapy is a very young discipline as well. Okay, so she was known for taking an interdisciplinary approach to movement, which was not very common. You were either ballet and you did ballet. You had your kind of dance that you did and you didn't do any other kind of dance. And so taking an interdisciplinary approach to movement and dance back then was very unusual. She integrated aspects of child development, dance, nonverbal communication, and physical rehabilitation into her work. So again, these are words that I'm probably not going to say correctly, but I'll do my best. She created Romanicious Tanztheater Dance Company, and that dance theater company combined her dance training and her movement experience with this work. Okay, so she founded the Laban Bartenieff Institute of Movement Studies in New York City, which still exists today. I have it in a future slide as a resource. You can do a full training program there. There's also now lots of online learning that you can do that you couldn't do before, thanks to the pandemic. So Bartenieff studied with Rudolf Laban, and she used Laban's theories to help polio patients. And what's interesting is, the entire field of physical therapy began when people were trying to help polio patients. So she used Laban's theories to help polio patients improve their movement capabilities and dancers to recover from injury and improve performance. So this work is now referred to as Bartenieff fundamentals. So the X rolling and the bigger movements that we will be doing come from Irmgard Bartenieff. If you want to think of like baby bear, mama bear, papa bear, or like small, medium, biggest. I would say the movements that you do in Feldenkrais are the smallest. And then HANA somatics, they are a little bit bigger. And then the movements you do in Bartenieff are even bigger. I know I'm very visual. So if you've been, watching things on YouTube or following social media, somatic movements, that might help you kind of, compartmentalize a little bit of the different, 3 different movement methods. Okay, so the slide I kept referring to. So there's 3 links here that you can click on in case you want to study and do the full training program in Feldenkrais, HANA somatics, or Bartenieff at the Levon Institute. And click to the next slide. Okay, so this brings us to why would you want to include somatics at the beginning of a yoga class? And I say at the beginning because that's usually where I include somatics when I teach a yoga class. It doesn't have to be that way, but I've found that works really well for me, but everyone's different. So somatics are a way to understand the larger movements and poses that are practiced later on in class. And I am a total anatomy geek. I'm a kinesiology, exercise science geek. My former training in art and fashion design is that I love to look at something and then tear it apart and see how it's been put together. And so yoga asanas are often really big shapes where we're in our end ranges of movement. And I think, sort of deconstructing and going down to the little pieces of what we put together to make that big shape or that big movement, teaching that to our students can help them in so many ways. And I find that somatics contributes to that. So for many reasons. First of all, somatics helps create new brain connections without a preconceived notion of aesthetics. So when we teach yoga poses, most people have seen the poses, right? There's pictures of poses. I mean, pre the photographic era, yoga was taught verbally from one teacher to one student. But once photography came on the scene, all of us in our psyche, in our awareness, knows what a downward dog looks like or knows what a triangle pose looks like. Whereas when you teach somatic movement, that's not there in the person's brain usually. And so it provides an opportunity for learning that wouldn't be there if somebody already had an idea of how something was supposed to look. So somatic movements are smaller pieces of movements that people are familiar with, but they bring new insight to these more big global movement patterns. So this is going to bring us into somatic concepts and terminology. And this first term is called body scanning. And body scanning is used in all 3 of these somatic methodologies. And you probably use it already when you teach yoga. Body scanning involves pausing and noticing where you are in space to facilitate internal awareness, so interoception, and neuromuscular re-education, more proprioception. So body scanning can enhance proprioception, and it can help students maintain the changes that occur in their movement practice. So for example, if you've taken some of the pre-recorded somatic sequences, many of them have a body scan at the beginning. Some of them also have a check, and that check could be any type of movement at all. It could be a somatic movement. It could be more of a preparatory corrective exercise movement. It could be a stretch. And then we do a sequence, a somatic sequence, and then we go back and recheck if there's a movement check, and also do the body scan again to notice what's changed. And I think that is really important because we're always learning when we are learning new movement patterns, but we don't always take the time to pause and sort of let things integrate and marinate And I don't think that it's something that, has to happen all the time. I like learning movement and then just learning the next movement and the next movement. But with somatics, I think what makes it so special is you learn something and then you pause and take a moment to just reflect before you learn the next thing. And this can really help with proprioception. Okay, back to pandiculation, this technique that was developed by Thomas Hanna. So definition of pandiculation is using one's body against gravitational forces to facilitate neuromuscular reeducation. Okay, so first let's talk about, neuromuscular reeducation. I remember I went to physical therapy for a shoulder injury. And because I'm a giant nerd, even when I was better, I kept going. I think I mentioned how I love learning in private sessions and one-on-one. So I was going and just paying like out of pocket, or whatever, out of network, because I really was learning so much from my physical therapist. And I remember asking him, like, why is this happening? And he said, because it's neuromuscular reeducation. So neuro meaning the brain, your muscles, and then re-education, learning new ways of moving. So there's 3 phases of pandiculation. The first phase is selecting an anatomical focus. And I'm going to move this just so I can see what I have here. And engaging or contracting the muscle group related to that area. We're going to actually do this together, but first, we'll talk about these 3 phases. The second phase is gradually relaxing that group through a fluid movement until you have explored your full range of motion. So first you contract the muscle group related to that area. Then you gradually relax that muscle group. And then you pause. So the pausing allows the nervous system to fully process and integrate that movement experience. And then, an example from the body scan. And this differentiates pandiculation from contract and release techniques. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with contract relax techniques, PNF techniques, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which is very similar in the sense that you contract a muscle group, then you gradually relax that muscle group. But you don't always necessarily pause to fully integrate the experience. And I think that pause is what differentiates pandiculation and somatic neuromuscular reeducation. Okay, let me make sure I didn't go too far. Yes, okay. I see. I have separate notes in here of like all the little movements that I want to make sure we do. And I think this is where it starts. No, we didn't. We're good. Okay. So pandiculation. Let's try it. So the first type of pandiculation we're going to try is super simple. Your dogs do it, your cats do it. When you were a kid, you did it, and you should still continue to do it. So if you lie on your back, and I'm going to do it with you.
Trina, can you stop your screen share so that everyone can see you?
Yes. This. Thank you. Stop share. Okay. Good. Yep. All right. Okay. So go ahead and just lie down, make yourself comfortable, and start to stretch your arms overhead and begin to tense muscles along the back of your body. So if you could reach for something maybe just beyond your fingertips, but you're also trying to reach for something just beyond your toes, your back starts to arch. You're tensing, and then you slowly let that go. Let's do it again, but this time with a yawn. So I know maybe it's not always possible to just yawn on demand, but let's try it. Maybe think of something that makes you sleepy and start to yawn. And notice where you tense up as you yawn. And when you finish yawning, notice that softening and relaxation phase. Sometimes yawning is contagious, so try it one more time. If it didn't work the first time, sometimes it's too bad you can't hear each other yawn, but we should play like a YouTube yawning video. But try one more time. So you're going to yawn. And just noticing that experience of contracting muscles and then slowly relaxing them. And especially with yawning, how it tightens up the muscles in your face, right? Because you're opening your mouth so wide and then relaxing. Okay, another one of my favorite pandiculation movements is, I call it dripping sideways. So we're gonna stand up, and this is done a lot in like modern dance class warm-ups. So if you stand with your feet about hip distance apart, and we're gonna start by contracting the muscles along the right side of your neck and trying to get your right ear to your right shoulder. You're feeling that contraction. And then you're going to continue that contraction into the right side of your waist. So contracting here to try to pull your right ribs closer to the top of your right pelvis. Still working that neck contraction. And then you'll get stuck. So start to bend your knees and then contract under your right armpit and reach down for the floor, but contract up, reaching through your left arm as you lower down all the way, whatever that is for you, and then let your head drop. And then start to contract by reaching, pushing your feet into the ground so your hamstrings contract. You're still contracting the right side of your waist, right side of your neck, but now there's some contraction through the left side of your waist. That brings you all the way up to stand. Let's do that on the other side. So begin to contract the left side of your neck. And we can think of this as like just a full lateral line pandiculation or contraction. And then take that contraction into the left side of your waist. Let your left arm hang. And then you're going to reach up with your right arm. You're still contracting left side of neck, left side of the waist. You keep dipping down low as if you could dip your left hand in a pool of water, and then pause at the bottom. Let your head hang. So now you don't have to contract your left side neck or waist because gravity. So you're going to contract the right side of your waist and your hamstrings, your leg muscles to push yourself, reaching all the way back up. And then pause for a moment to notice. Notice if it's easier to connect your brain to the sides of your body. So send your awareness from your right ear to the top of your right shoulder. Then send your awareness from your right armpit down the right side of your waist into your right hip. Continue your awareness as it moves down your right leg, outer right leg to your right foot. And then transition your awareness over to the outside of your left foot, up the outside of your left shin and thigh. Keep sending your awareness up the left side of your hip and waist, all the way up into your left armpit, top of your left shoulder, left side of your neck. And then we'll finish with a pandiculation that I really enjoy, which is a roll down. So for the roll down, want you to begin by contracting the muscles in the front of your neck, so your neck flexors. Try to get your chin as close to your sternum, your breastbone, as possible, without rounding your upper back. So it's just cervical flexion. And then begin to contract your upper abdominals, your upper rectus, obliques. And that contraction pulls your upper back away from an imaginary wall behind you. There's no flexion in your hips. This is just spinal flexion. That spinal flexion continues. So now your middle rectus, your lower rectus is contracting. There's still no flexion in your hips. So from the side, right, it's here, it's not here, if that makes sense, right? So I'm still just flexing my spine, not my hips. And then eventually you're going to get stuck. So I get stuck about right there, and then I have to flex at the hips. And then gravity takes you the rest of the way. Pause at the bottom. Take a moment to notice your breath and to release those contractions. Then feel your connection to the floor through your feet and begin to contract your abdominals. So lower rectus, middle rectus, of course, there's many, many other muscles, but that's a famous one that we usually know where it is. And as you can contract the lower rectus, the lower abdominals, that flexes your lumbar spine and starts to take you out of some of that hip flexion. And then you're still contracting. It's very focused still on the flexors of your spine. But now you'll probably notice the extensors of your spine have to pitch in order to bring you all the way back up. And then take a moment to pause and send your awareness to your throat. And then send your awareness down your breastbone, your chest, to your belly. Down the belly to the pubic bone. And then let your awareness just wash all the way down your legs into your feet. And then send your awareness to the backs of your heels. This is what helped bring you up from the roll up. So tracking your awareness up the backs of your calves, behind your knees, up the backs of your thighs, to your glutes. Your awareness converges at the sacrum, and then it travels up the spinal erectors from low back to middle back to upper back, and then all the way up through your cervical spine to the base of your skull. And pause for a moment and just notice how you're standing now versus before. There's a bit more awareness of either your connection to the ground or just the front and back of your body. So we will be doing more panticulations, of course, throughout the weekend and in the pre-recorded classes, the movement sections, but wanted to give you just little bit of experience here. Okay, looking at the time, let's do one, sorry, I'm thinking to myself. Let's skip that. Okay, so back to sharing the screen. And here. There we go. Okay, we are on sensory motor amnesia. So sensory motor, just moving this a little bit, amnesia is a term defined by Thomas Hanna. And he defines it as unconscious habitual movement patterns that create tension and discomfort due to ignoring the body's messages in response to physical or mental stress. The first thing I think of when I think of this is being on a long airplane ride. And that's usually not due to ignoring your body's messages, right? You're very aware of the messages of like, you've been sitting too long, you need to get up. It's just a lot of times you don't have the choice. But in other situations, sometimes, especially I was this way, I love learning. And as a student, sometimes, and an artist, I would get so focused and so in flow state when I was doing art or studying that I would ignore my body's messages, and, just be like curled up in a little ball knitting until 4 a.m. and then, wonder why my everything hurt the next day. So this can often manifest as chronic pain, which I should change to persistent pain because it's more pain science informed term. So I'm going to remember to do that. Manifest as persistent pain, stiffness, clicking, popping, numbness, or a lack of proprioception around a joint. And I'm sure, I know many or most of you are teachers, and you probably have a student or 2 or 5 or 10 or 50 that maybe have some sensory motor amnesia. And it can often be hard to help them. And this is one of the places in which somatics can really help. Somatic sequences can definitely help with the amnesia, sensory motor amnesia. And what are they? Somatic sequences are a series of movements that are taught with non-aesthetic cues. And we're going to get into somatic cueing in one of the next sessions. But a series of movements that are taught with non-aesthetic cues to foster body awareness and exploration of movement. Somatic sequences are about exploring movement options and internal sensations, which are an aspect of interoception. And the experience of these somatic sequences can reduce the experience of pain and a movement that someone may normally find to be uncomfortable. So, for example, I use somatic sequences all the time with my private clients. All of my private clients have something going on. Most of them have been with me for, 8 years, 10 years, a lot of them. So what the issues are varies, depending on the day or the week, throughout the time we've worked together. And I am not a clinician. I'm not a physical therapist. But when they are, say, experiencing pain in a certain specific movement, very, very often I will just go, oh, wow, like they're experiencing pain in this movement. Let's do that movement in a very tiny, small way, and see if they still are having pain. And oftentimes they don't. If they do, of course, I pick something else. This is what's called graded exposure. So when when you're in the persistent pain phase, and I shouldn't get ahead of myself because we're going to talk about pain science, but very, very often moving in small, slow ways that are similar to the quote unquote movement that's creating pain doesn't create pain. And that's where we as yoga teachers and movement professionals can be really helpful to our students and ourselves. Okay. So here's another concept, and I wanted to make sure that, yes, and it's called feathering, and this comes from Hanna Somatics. And feathering involves easing out of a position when you encounter a movement restriction, and then gradually moving back into that same position to see if your experience of the restriction has changed. We're going to feel this in just a moment. So it involves pausing or body scanning as you move in and out of the position. And you probably do this intuitively on your own already. But this is a way to put a language to it and to remember, to use it to help your students. These movements can be incredibly subtle, using only the tension needed to practice the movement. So I'm going to stop share so you can see me. Let's do some feathering. Stop share. Okay. For feathering, let's do this. You're going to come onto your back with your arms straight out to the sides, and your legs are wide. So if you want, you could do a full X position. I think it's nice just to do arms out to the side for now, but totally up to you. And then the beginning of a lower extremity initiated X roll, meaning the rolling happens with your two legs. I have to remember to show you a video of baby Isla, friend's baby, who does the best lower extremity based initiated X roll. Okay, so start to slide your right leg towards your left leg. And if you're on a mat, you might want to, get rid of it so it's easier to slide. And then as you slide your right leg towards your left leg, at a certain point, you're going to get stuck. So when you get stuck, just pause for a moment, drop your leg, notice where you are. Then push your right arm into the ground, pick your right leg up and over, and then immediately find the floor with your right big toe. So now you're in this T or crucifix with your arm. With your arms, your legs are kind of like scissors. They're crossed. So I'm not trying to, bring my foot up to my hand and do like a revolved half moon. My legs are pretty close together. And then the feathering I'm going to do is really small. So I am just kind of exploring some movement in the side of my right waist, down the outside of my right leg. And it's pretty small, so you might have to come up to the screen and look closely. But I'm just kind of reaching and retracting my right leg. And feathering in and out of some places of restriction. Restriction is not a bad thing. Restriction means you have a body and that it's held together. So just want to remind you of that. But just kind of in exploring little tiny movements. And so even though I explored like this kind of leg reach thing, maybe your exploration is more in the upper back. So maybe your exploration is more bringing your right shoulder blade a little closer to the ground and then bringing it away. So you could really pick different places to feather in and out. And then come back into the X position with your legs, arms are wide or in an X overhead. And send your awareness to the area of your body that you are feathering, meaning you are kind of moving tiny little, in tiny little ways in and out of a movement. And for me, my brain is much better connected to the right side of my waist than to the left. So we can, even this out. And again, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of room to slide. So this time, slide your right leg so that it's just in line with your right hip, like Tadasana. But then slide your left leg towards your right. And this time when you do that little hop skip over with your left foot, your right leg is, you can kind of, I'm doing like all kinds of little wiggly things. You're in a version of this, like, I think of my legs like scissors right now, in a version of the scissoring that works for you. Okay, so maybe last time you did arms in a T and you want to try arms in a V and explore this diagonal feathering. So from my left fingertips to my left toes, I imagine somebody's pulling my left toes a little bit, and then somebody else pulls on my left fingers. And that's some feathering and a place of restriction, some mild restriction for me. Or I could go back to doing the other way where I'm more reaching through the left hip and then letting that go. So depressing the left ilium bone to reach through my left toes, but not really reaching through my left hand. You could do the one we did on the other side with arms out to the side, and you push your left hand to the ground, and that kind of feathers you over more towards your right shoulder blade and then back. So just any tiny movement. I'm doing kind of like a little Bob Fosse arm reach, lateral translation of the rib cage. But where can you find some small area of restriction? And then maybe I'm exploring now, like a little tuck and untuck, a little anterior, posterior tilt here. Okay, and then coming back to where we started, legs are wide, arms are wide, and pause to notice the area of your body where you were feathering, where you were moving in tiny little ways. Maybe that area of your body is a little heavier on the ground or lighter, feels more lifted away from the ground. Maybe that area of your body is just easier to sense, feel, and connect to in your awareness. And then go ahead and bend your knees and come on up to seated. So a lot of my students get, really caught up, I'm sure you do too, and what's the right way or the wrong way or the right position. And if you're lifting heavy weights, there's usually a right and a wrong position, to optimize lifting those like a heavy object. But with movements like this, the position, it's not a right or wrong. And so letting your students explore in these kind of ways can really empower them to choose what works for them. Okay, I'm gonna go back to share screen. Here we go. Okay. Movement constraints. If you follow me on social media, I did a post on this recently. One of my favorite somatic concepts. Movement constraints are constraints placed upon a task to help you isolate one joint's movement as compared to another. So if you've heard of task-based movement in the exercise science world, in the athletics community, most movements are task-based or skill-based, as opposed to, say, aesthetic-based, like in dance, or shape-based, as in asana. And so constraints can act as a way to teach you how to organize your movements in a new way that's different from habitual movement patterns that would occur without the constraint. So this is where the puzzle pieces of these awareness through movement classes in Feldenkrais, they always have a constraint that allows you to have your discovery or your aha moment. So for example, we're going to do one right now. We're going to see how far you can sway your knee from side to side while keeping the sole of your foot connected to the floor. And I teach this one a lot when I teach workshops, and it's really interesting. So let me stop share and come look, make sure you can see the sole of my right foot, which is, I'm bouncing it right there, maybe before you lie down. So if you cross your left thigh over your right, like I'm doing, I've got the sole of my right foot on the ground, arms are out to the sides. I'm going to take my legs, my knees, over to the right, but only as far as I can keep the outer edge of my right foot on the ground. And then I come back. So it's a movement that's happening at, of course, my hips and pelvis, but at my ankle joint. So right here is where I get stuck. That's the constraint. That's how I learn something new, especially if you've always done this way, right? So if you do it this way, nothing wrong with that at all. It's just different. You'll always feel the same stretch. You'll always feel the same sensation. It will always be the same movement pattern. I love this one. But what happens if, that's one of my favorite questions to ask, You do that same movement. You've maybe done hundreds, thousands of times, but you have to use your awareness. You can't see your pinky toe. You can't see the outside of your right foot. You have to just feel it and sense it. How far do your legs go over to the left without, avoiding that constraint and then coming back? And then try it on the other side. Right thigh crosses over left. So what's really cool is like the amount of rotation that I do in my pelvis when I do that versus when I do that, right? That's rotating my pelvis and my spine and my rib cage, teaches me something new about rotation of my pelvis, which is really important for walking, for gait pattern. So see what it's like on the side. How is your connection, your awareness to the outside of your left foot, your left pinky toe? You just drop your knees over to the right and you come back. And you can put your left foot wherever you like. So maybe you do a few with your left foot really close to your left sits bone, and then you do some with your foot farther away from your left sits bone. Maybe you have your left foot more over to the left as you drop your knee over, or maybe it's more over to the right. And how does that change your experience of the movement? So the constraint is that you're not allowed to lift the sole of your foot off the floor. And what does that teach you? What can you learn about a movement pattern you may have done many, many times by changing just that one thing? Okay, back to share screen. And here we go. Okay, so one more constraint example. So this is, I did a social media post about this as well. And this is a nice one to do if you are teaching downward facing dog in your yoga class, which most yoga classes have downward facing dog in them. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna lie on our left side with our knees bent. And we're going to try to straighten our knee in two ways. So let me stop share. There we go. And I'm just gonna make sure I stay on track. It's hard to decide which ones, which constraints to teach you because there's so many good ones. Okay, so you're lying on your left side with your knees bent. You can of course put something underneath your head as a pillow. I'll grab my blanket. And it just kind of, curled up, you're ready to go to sleep. You're going to hold your right foot with your left hand. So here we are, right? And I want you to try to straighten your knee. And again, straighten is not like straighten it all the way. It can be if you want it to, but it might be like straighten it 2 centimeters, especially since it's somatics and we're moving small. But you're gonna try to straighten your knee a little bit by pushing your foot forward and back. So you just, straightened a little, it's bending a little. And notice how that feels. The constraint is your left hand holding your right foot. You could, yes, of course, do this with a strap, but I think it's kind of nice to do it with your hand, but you make it work for you. And then let that go. And of course, we could come back onto our back for a moment just to pause and notice. You can even sense how the right side of your sacrum and pelvis connects to the floor versus your left. This could be like a whole hour class for sure. We're just taking a little snippet. We're gonna come back, same constraint, left hand to right foot. We'll grab a strap. And this time I want you to try to straighten your knee. And again, straighten can be 1 millimeter, 1 inch, 1 centimeter, by moving your pelvis backwards. So your foot doesn't go forwards this time. We already did that one. This time you're straightening the knee, tiny little bit, but by doing, however you like to think about it, maybe an anterior tilt, moving your butt bone, your sit bone backwards a little bit. Do that 4 or 5 more times and notice how it feels, how it's similar to or different from straightening your knee and bending it by pushing your foot away. And then let's combine the two. So before we do that, let's check in real quick. Come into constructive rest. I should have probably had you do a down dog at the beginning, but I didn't. That's okay. Can do this again, doing down dog as a check, recheck. But for now, as a check, recheck, just notice your awareness of your 2 pelvic halves and how they feel as far as how they feel connected to the floor. Does one side feel maybe lighter or heavier? Maybe it feels like you have more of a curve in your lower back on one side versus the other. That's actually the case for me. It feels like I have a little more curve in my low back on the right than I do on the left. Whether that's true or not, it's just how it feels. Okay, so now we're gonna do a little bit of both. So same constraint, left hand holds right foot. Of course, we could do it, it's endless. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But so now try to straighten your knee by doing a small combination of both. So your foot goes forward a little bit and your butt goes backwards a little bit. And do that 5 or 6 times. You might notice that it's like, oh, wow, I really just want to do sits bone back. Or I really just want to do foot forward, and it's hard to combine them. I'm having that experience. You could even take your right hand, your fingers to your right sits bone, and now you've got feedback. And think of, moving your sits bone back equally in the same amount as you're pushing your foot into your hand. That's kind of helping me get both going at the same time. And again, tiny, small, should be no pain, no discomfort. Use a strap. One of my clients, she's hilarious. And she's like, I have short arms. I do too, actually. I have a long torso and short arms. So you can always make your arms longer with the strap. 2 more times. Okay, now I'm mapping this pattern a little better. And there's no right or wrong. So it doesn't mean that combining them is the best way, or just using your foot or just moving your sits bone back is the best way. They're all strategies and options, and you get to choose. Okay, come back onto your back, constructive rest. Take a moment to bring your awareness again to your pelvis, your sacrum, your 2 buttocks, your lower back on both sides. And what do you feel? What do you sense? Not just in your lower back or your contact points of your pelvis to the floor, but maybe down the back of your legs. And then let's do downward facing dog, knowing that we've only done, one side of the constraint. So come into 4-point kneeling, tuck your toes, come into a down dog. Notice how you came into the down dog, right? You had to straighten your knees. Did you straighten your knees by moving your sits bones away from your heels? Or by pushing your feet into the floor? Or by a combination of both? And then coming back down. So, right, sometimes people get stuck in down dog because maybe they're just pushing their feet into the ground and they're not really lifting their sits bones up and back, or vice versa. So new ways of experiencing and learning movements that you are doing all the time, like straightening your knees, but in a different way. Okay, to share screen. Okay. Yielding is another somatic concept. Oops, went too fast. Okay, so yielding is consciously releasing into gravity and letting go of unnecessary muscle tension. Oh, sounds really nice, right? And we've heard our teachers say it, we've said it ourselves. Saying it is, often easier than doing it. I know, especially for me. So, but there is this sense of yielding that I find comes much more easily after practicing a somatic sequence. So yielding can promote increased interoception and help tap into the parasympathetic nervous system. And what I notice after I do a somatic sequence or I teach a somatic sequence is that I will often feel in the body scan at the beginning that certain areas of my body aren't touching the floor or aren't very connected to the floor. Maybe it's the backs of the thighs, maybe it's the mid-back ribs area. And then after the sequence, it's like, I yield and I feel more connected to the floor, meaning some of those postural muscles that are just, always on all the time because they need to be, because gravity, get this message. No, you're lying down. You can relax, you can soften, and you can yield. And that really helps tap into the parasympathetic nervous system. I wrote here, sorry, I feel like there's some sort of lip gloss stuck in my mouth. Example, squishy mattress versus hard floor. So it's a lot easier to sense yourself if you're lying on a hard floor than it is on a squishy mattress, right? But most of us, it's easier to yield and soften into a squishy mattress. And so I do think that when folks do a somatic sequence and they are able to soften and yield into a hard floor, it really yields a lot of aha moments. Another example I have here is using a weighted blanket or a foam roller. When the pandemic hit, my husband and I were quite anxious, as I'm sure many of you were. And a lot of our friends had been talking about their weighted blankets. So we decided, okay, well, why not? The time is now. So we got weighted blankets and we've been using them. And it is really interesting how much easier it is to yield into the mattress at night when I'm under that weighted blanket. And I think a lot of people, Moshe was famous. He was really, as far as I know, one of the first people to introduce using foam rollers. And he used them all the time when he would teach his classes. If you can't sense your spine when you're lying on a mat, squishy mat, or even on a hard floor, and then you get on a foam roller and it's, you're lying along the foam roller with your spine, many of my students are able to yield there when they weren't able to on, say, a regular mat. Okay. We're almost done because then it's going to be time to do the class. I'm just looking to see. Yeah, okay. This is my first time teaching this immersion, and so it's always a guessing game on how long things will take. Rocking. Rocking is one of my favorites. I love rocking. I love rolling. Rocking is a sensory motor technique that appears in many somatic sequences in the form of oscillations, rolling, and rhythmic movements. We'll be doing all of these things. Rocking helps restore cranial rhythms. If you've ever had craniosacral therapy, you know what I'm talking about, and promotes a parasympathetic response and increases vagal tone. It also may promote better regulation of the visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive systems. So it's so funny, when I think of rocking, I immediately think of the playground and how much I loved the playground as a kid, because there were so many things to like rock and swing and roll on. And but as an adult, I think first thing we can think of in terms of rocking is a hammock. And like, how soothing is it to rock in a hammock or a rocking chair? You know, or like as a kid, those little rocking horses. And sometimes we forget about those things and we don't do them. And so somatic movements are there for us to remind us to do those types of movements. Okay, follow through. Follow through means allowing all of your joints to move through a sequence without isolating one body part relative to another. So I think it's very empowering to be able to decide what you want to isolate and move and what you don't. I'm a Pilates teacher as well, and Pilates does a really good job with that. So does like FRC, where you're isolating a joint as opposed to integrating multiple joints. And follow through is allowing your joints to respond. So let's actually feel this. We're going to be doing it in the class again later in the form of what's called the gas pedal movement. But for here and now, I want to give you a follow through experience that happens with spinal flexion and extension. So let me stop share. Okay, so you will be lying on your back with your knees bent. And of course, if you want to give yourself a little bit of cushion under your head, you're more than welcome. I wouldn't actually put too much though, because you want your head to be able to rock. So if it's propped up too high, it won't. Okay, so this can be initiated from anywhere. So I'm going to have us start initiating it through the mid-back. Place your hands on your front ribs where you feel them poke out the most, but make sure your elbows are supported by the floor. And we're going to do a little cat-cow right in the middle of your back. So you press your ribs up into your hands, and then right at that mid-back area below the shoulder blades, you'll feel a little lift. And then do the opposite. Sink your front ribs in the middle of your back into the ground. And then go back and forth. And notice how you can isolate this movement. Perhaps, right? It depends. Some people can and some people can't, depending on all kinds of things. But if you can, isolate it. Do just the cat-cow right here, where your hands are and your middle back just behind. So it's not a untuck of your pelvis. It's not a head nod. And then begin to make it a little bigger. And when you make it bigger, notice where you experience the follow through first. So maybe some of you experience it in your lower back, right? As soon as you arch your mid back and make it bigger, you feel your low back arch. And then maybe you also feel your pelvis tilts anteriorly forward. But it could be the opposite. You could notice that as you make the arch bigger in your front ribs, that it drops your chin to your chest. So there's more follow through up the chain as opposed to down the chain. Focus a little more now on the cat part or the flexion. So as you bury your front ribs and your mid back into the floor, do you notice how your head tilts back if you're getting follow through up the chain? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you notice that when you go into the cat or the mid back sinking, that you feel the follow through mostly in your lower back, meaning it also flexes. And or you also notice the posterior tilt of your pelvis, right? Your tailbone starts to lift a little because you're in a posterior tilt. Now make it even bigger, right where your hands are. And let there be follow through all the way up and down the chain. And if this is, really confusing and you're a visual learner, because that's me, just come up to your screen and you can watch me. Here's my cat. And notice what that did to my head, neck, low back, and pelvis. Here's my cow. Continue 2 or 3 more times. Now, I didn't say to do anything with your feet, but what happens if you push your feet into the ground when you bury your mid-back into the floor? And what happens when you pull your feet backwards when you arch your mid-back? Can you feel how now the follow-through isn't just head, ribs, pelvis? It's head, ribs, pelvis, all the way into your feet. I didn't cue anything breath-wise, but explore your breath. So for me, I like to inhale when I arch my mid-back, and then exhale when I curl and round there. But you could do the opposite. Try different strategies. Oh, so relaxing. And then let that go. And just pause and notice your connections to the floor. So can you sense how your tailbone and sacrum connect to the ground? Low back, middle back, upper back, neck, and head. And then hug your knees to your chest. You can roll onto your side. Come back up to seated. So we will do some more follow through. Okay, we are almost there. We need time to move. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. All right, so we did that. Okay, so why would you want to include somatics in your yoga classes? Well, you're already here in this training, so you probably have an idea of why. But if, a lot of times students will ask me, why are we doing this, So here's some reasons. To create new brain connections without a preconceived notion of aesthetics. To help bring new insight into more global movements. To expose your students to an inquiry-based learning style, where the cues are often mostly questions rather than commands. To promote movement autonomy and reduce stress. Okay, some more reasons to include somatics in your yoga classes is somatics, it's ground-based movement. So it's usually very accessible. When I would take Feldenkrais ATM classes, there were often, almost always, people in the class who had a caretaker because they couldn't get down to the floor or back up, but they really benefited from Feldenkrais. Maybe they had just, all kinds of situations, but so their caretaker would help them get down onto the floor. They would do the entire class, and then when their caretaker came back to pick them up, they would help them get back up. And then, of course, the idea is eventually they were able to get down and up on their own, but they were still able to experience the benefits of somatics because it's a ground-based movement for the most part. And that helps reduce muscle guarding and tension. It helps your nervous system feel safe. The feedback from the floor allows you to notice nuance of your movements with less effort. We'll get into closed kinetic chains later on. Somatics can teach how to distribute effort and forces more evenly, which can apply to larger movements and yoga poses. So oftentimes, say in back bends or twists, we want our students or we want ourselves to back bend evenly throughout the spine or rotate evenly throughout the spine. And it's hard to do that. And so by doing a somatic sequence related to, say, the back bend or the twist at the beginning of class, you will often get really remarkable results with getting more even amounts of rotation because of those smaller movements. Okay, I'm gonna stop screen share. And I wanna get right into an experience. So this is a class where I am going to use some of the pre-recorded somatic sequences at the beginning. And the way I designed this, I took my friend Rocky's course, which I highly recommend you take. It's all about creative sequencing for yoga classes. And what I loved about it, amongst many things, was there were 4 classes just like this, 4 sessions. And each class was a different way or style of sequencing and a different type of class. And so I have done the same thing. So today's class is biased more towards the Bartenieff somatics movements. Tomorrow, and it's more, I would say, beginner friendly. Tomorrow morning's class is a lateral line flow. It's a little more advanced, requires a little more strength and flexibility. And it's also Bartenieff focused, so bigger movements. And then the third class, that's the back bends, is going to be, we'll do a Hanna somatic sequence at the beginning. And the movements are going to be smaller. The somatic movements are smaller. And then we're going to do very much of a FRC inspired yoga class. So a lot of mobility drill, tiny isolated movements. Then finally, the last class, we are going to go back to Feldenkrais, but kind of with a mixture of Bartenieff ish. And we'll go into an arm balance. And of course, at the end, we don't have to. It's a figure 4 pigeon exploration. I'm not a good arm balancer. I have super long torso and wide hips, but it doesn't matter. It's still fun. So know that each class is going to be very different because I know you all teach in different ways. So I want you to get sort of like a tapas or a buffet selection. So you know that the somatics can be applied to any style of yoga class that you teach. Okay, with that being said, if you are somebody who likes to have, I like to just experience it, but everything I'm going to teach today, wait, let me go back. Oh, here we go. You can see me. This is the class outline and it's called Spiral Flow. And this is what we're going to do today. And it's all written out. I know when I take trainings, which I take a ton of trainings in continuing ed, and I feel like I'm writing everything down because I want to remember it. And I hate that because I want to just experience it. So it's all written for you. Obviously, it's also all filmed for you, but you have both. And from the pre-recorded sequence for today, the twisting and spiraling with somatics. So there's 3 sequences. And the way I did this or designed this course is, so sequence 1 was side lying palm slides. So you could do side lying palm slides with this sequence, yoga sequence that I'm going to teach. You could do side lying knee slides. You could do supine X rolls, upper extremity initiated, which is how I'm going to teach it. We're going to do some of those. So these pre-recorded sequences are basically plug and play. Plug and play into the classes that I'm going to teach this weekend, but plug and play as far as directions of movement and class themes go, which we'll get into on Sunday. But I wanted to really give you lots of tools so that you can, of course, teach this that you've learned from me, but you can also make it your own.